Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Fralin Biomedical Research Institute's Maury Strauss Distinguished Public Lecture Series. I'm here in my office. I've just removed my mask. There's nobody with me. And it's going to be my pleasure tonight to introduce today's speaker. But before then, I'd like to remind everybody about the Maury Strauss Distinguished Public Lecture. This lecture series has been generously supported by Mr. Maury Strauss, to whom we are extremely grateful, who brings to us and the community some of the leading people, luminaries, thought leaders in a variety of areas related to health, medicine, science, etc. So we're extremely fortunate to have this kind of support from our community. So Maury, thank you very much for your support of this program. And also, before I get to introducing tonight's speaker, I want to put in a plug for the next speaker in the series, which will be next month on November the 19th. And the next speaker will be Dr. Irene Tracy, Professor of Anesthetic Neuroscience in the Department of Clinical Neuroscience at the University of Oxford. And Dr. Tracy will tell us about can we ever really see pain, unraveling the mysteries of pain through neuroimaging. So that should also be a very, very exciting presentation. We look forward to seeing you, many of you there. And I also have to put in a plug just for a minute because my wife Sandra's on the line. She's out of town in Asheville with our daughter Laura. Had a baby a couple days ago, our 8th grandchild, baby Ford. So I want to say hi to them as well. Okay, without further ado, it is truly my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Ayanna Howard from Georgia Tech. Dr. Howard currently serves as the chair in the School of Interactive Computing and holds the Linda J. and Mark C. Smith Chair Professor position. And this is in the Schools of Interactive Computing and in the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Georgia Tech. Dr. Howard did her undergraduate work in computer engineering at Brown University, and then went on to do both her master's and doctoral degrees at the University of Southern California. And there she studied also computer engineering. She also picked up an MBA degree along the way, I should say. After finishing her training and education at that point, she went on to become a computer scientist and advanced technology at NASA, working in Pasadena at the Jet Propulsion Lab of NASA, and then became a senior robotics researcher there at the JPL, working in the area of telerobotics. She was very much involved early on with leading the team that employed and deployed artificial intelligence for the Mars rover system. So she's been in the game in important advances in robotics and telerobotics in a variety of ways since the beginning in many respects. 2005 is when she came back to academia and joined the faculty at Georgia Tech, initially as an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering. And at that time, she founded a new research laboratory at Georgia Tech, the Human Automation Systems Lab that is still operational. Along the way, based on her contributions, she's received many honors and accolades. She was named the Motorola Professor at Georgia Tech, and then recently, as I mentioned, the Smith Chair Professor. She serves on a variety of very important national advisory boards, including the Status of Women in Computer Research and the American Association for the Advancement of Science Advisory Board on Opportunities in Science. She has always maintained a sincere interest in career advancement for people in science, including women and minorities, and she herself is really a living example of that success. Her publications are many. I won't go through them in detail, but I do want to point out one or two things, if I might. She has published on why exactly people might trust a robot, and then moved her work towards pediatric therapy in robots, some of which we'll be hearing about this evening. And then socially interactive humanoid robots and how they can be used in rehabilitation, using kinematics, giving feedback to children, and human-robot trust, for example. And so I think one of the things that probably comes through to the general public about these titles is I think you can see not only is Dr. Howard a leading innovator and technologist when it comes to robotics, but she also is a leading thinker in the whole area of the interface of that technology with humans and the human condition, and not just what the technology may do to excite scientists and engineers, but also what it can do to really serve humanity, and thinking about how we interact with these machines in positive ways. And again, tonight we're going to hear about how she's deploying that to use in pediatrics and to help children and in health and medicine. And I'll just close by saying, as I said, she's been recognized in many ways, and one of those is as the top 50 U.S. women in technology. She's won the Brown Engineering Alumni Medal, Business Insider selected her amongst the top 20 of the most powerful women engineers in the world, and she's won numerous awards recognizing her contributions from NASA. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to this evening's speaker, Dr. Ayanna Howard, and please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is, I'm a storyteller. That's what I've become. And one of the things I like to do is talk about research, but also talk about the story behind the research. And so the story I'm going to talk to you today about is in pediatric robotics, but also, a lot of times you see the finished product, you see the finished research, and it's like, oh, that's so wonderful and so amazing. But I also want to walk you through the journey to get there as well. One, I think is important I'm an engineer, I'm a computer scientist. Sometimes I think it's important to understand that it's the journey and the process that's just as important as the final product. And so that's what I'm going to do in this time that I have with you. So with that, I will begin by sharing my screen and sharing my presentation. All right, so like it was stated, Michael stated, I've done a lot of different things, science-driven robotics. I work on bias and trust in robotics and AI, and I want to talk to you about the work I do in pediatrics and in pediatric robotics. And so one of the key elements in all of my research, though, is the fact that there is a human in the loop somewhere. The human is either at the expert, so I'm getting the data from the expert scientist, the expert clinician, and trying to take that and map into the robot. It could be that my robots are interacting with users, and so I'm interacting with people in their day-to-day activities, and that is where the human is. Or it could be that the human is working with the robot in a collaborative fashion. And so one of the common themes, even though I've done a lot of different things, it's always with the person, it's always with the human, which means that there are certain things I think about whenever I start on a new project that might seem different. And it's like, why are you doing that? But there's a human in the loop. So I want to talk to you a little bit about developing robots and the artificial intelligence and technologies to engage children with special needs. And what I say is that children are unique in that they have such a range of diverse experiences, such a range of diverse attributes, that when you design a technology around that target population, it also means that you are seeding technology that works for pretty much everyone else because they are so diverse and there's so much deviation, and standard deviations is pretty wide when you're addressing the needs of children. So why children? So one of the things is recent stats have said that worldwide there's approximately 150 million children with disabilities. And as someone who works in this space, we know it's more. Unfortunately, there are still some countries where parents don't want to necessarily check the box in order to identify whether their child has a disability. So we actually think that there's a larger number, but we'll go with the 150. At least for our conversation here. Now, the other interesting thing is, as I mentioned, like when you work with children, it really expands and counters and designs for the rest. Currently, as of, well, before COVID, it was estimated that 15% of the world's population live with a disability. So that's the now. But there's two stats that I think I want to share with you. So one is that we know that with countries where the life expectancy is greater than 70, such as the United States, places like Japan, that individuals, adults, will spend about 8 years of their lifespan with a disability. And so the disability could be anything from mild cognitive impairment, you might forget a little bit, maybe it's a slight visual impairment, so you're not able to see as well, you're not able to drive. Or it might literally be something that's a mobility impairment. And so, walking across the street with a flashing light takes a little bit longer. And so what I think about now is when we have these statistics, 15%, it does not incorporate or include the changes in our society that will augment and increase. And why I say that, and why I think now is even more important to work in this space of rehab and understanding disabilities, is that as we know, with those recovering from COVID, there's now an increase in the number of disabilities that is going to come, whether it's a mild cognitive impairment in terms of memory loss, or whether it's visual, and we have no idea. And so I think working in this space is going to be a direct need, not necessarily for older adults, but I think for a lot more individuals than we even anticipate. And so one, I'm it's sort of apprehensive that these numbers are going to grow, but I'm also excited that all of the things in terms of technologies and designs around rehabilitation and therapy and working with individuals with disabilities may actually have an impact beyond the target demographic that I traditionally work with. So let me talk about kids and the journey. So when I first got into this space, I was literally on glaciers, running rovers, trying to grab science data. And within a year, I had decided that I wanted to work in the healthcare space. And there's a story to there. It's not like that drastic of a jump, but there is a story that's weaved, and I'm perfectly, if anyone asks me the question, I'm perfectly willing to share. But I found myself that I wanted to work with children, pediatrics, and I wanted to do something in robotics. And I remember going to do my observations with a clinician, and she brought in a child, and I'm looking at the chart, and I'm looking, and I'm like, oh, what are these scales? Oh, that's a designation of their motor classification, their motor function. But I just observe. So she brought in a child, and the child was basically a scale of 2 in terms of mobility. And, you know, I'm looking, I'm like, okay, maybe a slight limp. Okay, I see that. And she brought another child, and it's like, oh, by the way, same classification. And I'm looking, and this child had no limp, but seemed to favor one arm over the other. And I'm thinking, well, what's the difference? Like, why are they classified in the same aspects? Why do they have the same label, but yet they move differently? And so we had this whole story about how when we talk about these aspects of movement, and we talk about children, and we talk about the labels that we as adults give, that they're pretty much just a guide. They're a guide to just start the conversation. And so that was my first lesson, to think about designing robots such that the labels that they have, whether it's a child with CP, a child with autism, is just a guide, but you have to treat every child uniquely based on observing them in real time. And you have to adapt into a unique partner in real time. And so that's really the whole concept of designing robotics and designing technologies for individuals, is that being a person, being a human is just a guide, but our technology has to work closely so that we are not labeling or mislabeling based on that guide. And so one of the challenges then is, how do I come into a scenario and identify and personalize this interaction, given that the movement characteristics are so vast and so diverse? The other big challenge is, believe it or not, the child's cognitive behavior is different. Although I will claim that everyone now in this Zoom time is starting to revert to this aspect of having difficulties paying attention. And this is because there's a lot of reasons why adults, but for kids, the thing about it is that kids are developing. Kids are understanding the world. They're looking at cause and effect. And so they'll see things, and it'll be like, oh, there's a light flashing, there's a light flashing, oh, there's a fly, you know, what is this? Oh, fly, boom, okay, I'm done. There's no reason for me to continue looking at this light. And if you think about that, it means that children, i.e. we say, oh, they're not paying attention, you know, they only have a 10-minute attention span, but they're learning. And the way that these neurons are connecting is that they are getting all of this input, and they're trying to filter. And so them switching from one situation to another is their process of filtering and learning and wondering and saying, okay, this is really, really important versus this. But in order to figure that out, you have to learn. And so this is the scenario you're talking about. If I bring in any technology and any design, I have to think about engagement. Now, as an engineer, it's like, what is engagement? I want to measure robots. They should follow the directions. It should be 1, 2, 3. But now I have to think about, well, there's this aspect called engagement. And engagement deals with what? Which I will get into. How do you measure and monitor engagement? and then sustain that engagement overall. So I thought about this again. I went to these observations, and the first kind of thing is, as I observed, I realized this cognitive aspect. I realized that every child is unique. Now I have to figure out what to do. And so whenever we're designing a technology for a new application, whenever we're designing, even with robotics or artificial intelligence for people, we need data, right? We don't just imagine stuff. We just don't say, oh, I think that this is how a clinician works with a child, and I'm just going to imagine it because, you know, I watched the TV. No, we have to collect actual data. And so one of the things that we do is, and very early on, was go into the sessions and collect data. So observe, but collect the data. How does the clinician interact with a child? When a child is struggling, what does the clinician do? Does she move in closer, or does she stay away? Does she grab a hand and try to move the hand, or does she just wait? Like all of these aspects, we collect the data. And believe it or not, there's a pattern. There is a model that can be created based on this interaction and the response from the child. And so using that data, we can then take it as expert knowledge and code it on the rover, on the robot, so that when the robot is interacting with the child, it's looking at its data set, is looking at the data from human-human interactions and say, okay, in this scenario, when the child is doing this, let me look at my memory banks. What did the human clinician do in order to evoke whatever behavior that I want? Oh, that's what I need to do. And then the robot basically is mimicking those same sessions that we've learned and it's learned from that human-human interaction. So based on any type of new technology, humans, again, are the root of the starting and the process. And in this case, collecting data to see what is the best type of interactions of clinicians, humans, and children, humans in that aspect. So given this observations, given this data, we then constructed a system. I'm going to talk about the three components of this system. There's one is the gamification. I talked about engagement. How do you engage a child so that it's interactive, it's continuous. And so if you have a child that's switching attention, you can re-engage. And so we use games for that, and I'll talk about that. Then we also have this aspect of assistive technologies, which is if you have a child that has a severe disability, how do you still engage them with a robot? How do you still engage them if you're thinking about gait therapy? If a child has a limited mobility in terms of walking, what do you do in order to offset that so they can still engage? And so we look at assistive technologies. And then of course, it's the robot therapy coach itself, which we call the robot playmate because we are dealing with kids. But we design the robot so that it is a partner. So it is an element. It is not a, you know, I am the adult robot and you are the child human. It is a, I'm your playmate, I'm your partner, and we're going to play together. And, you know, it should be fun, even though we might be doing therapy. And that's important in terms of these interactions. So talk about gamified therapy. So one of the things that we look at, and we had to think about how do we make therapy fun? We started by looking at the whole gaming industry. So the gaming industry is $1 billion industry, and people will spend hours and hours and hours on the same game. So how can we translate this to the therapy space? So here's some videos. That we have. So one of the things that you see is children are interacting with these games. So we call this game Super Pop. So the way Super Pop works is how do you define and how do you get data from kids? So if I have a game where I'm popping things in a space while I'm moving, so how do you get people to pop? How do you get these kids to pop? You have to make it a game. And so we designed a game, this is called Super Pop, where we have different worlds. You can wear hats. In one game, we have a background and you can wear a queen hat and a king hat. And your goal is to pop the bubbles as fast as you can. And one of the things about personalization, your speed might be different than another child's speed. And so how do I augment the game in order to address that, in order to do that? And so part of the personalization is figuring out that what is my speed? What is my aspect of touching something and popping it? So we use the virtual reality games for that, called Super Pop. We also look at tablet-based games. And so one of the things about working with your fingers is, first off, is what is cause and effect? If you think about something happens, I want to press. Something happens, I want to press. Understanding that motion causes a positive outcome. So we also use games for this. If I touch, something happens, that's a positive. And then if you think about touching, if I ask you to always put your hands down and then touch, even if it's a tablet, even if it's a phone, what I am doing is I'm now invoking motions. And so how do we design games so that we capitalize on that movement with either a tablet or with a phone in this aspect? So one is about cause and effect, but then the other is about this movement in space, and in not only 2D, but 3D space. So you put it all together and you have these games that allow you to take a therapy objective and apply motion and movement therapy to it so that it is fun, it's engaging, it's continuous, and we can switch it out. And so if I am bored with, the bubbles, I can change it to a boat. And so now it's like, I need a boat, and here's the boat, and the boat has to cross the river. And so I have to grab the boat and cross the river. And so it's the same kind of motions of pressing and moving in terms of upper body movement. So let's talk about the assistive technologies. So when we have a child who has a severe limitation in terms of upper body or lower body, how do you ensure that whatever movement they have, we can grab and work with that? And so if it's got, I want to do arm movement, but I have high spasticity. And so all I really want you to do is I want you to focus on intent. And even if it's just a little bit of motion, can I do that? So we designed technologies that allowed this movement to happen using buttons so that you can interact with these tablet games. One of the things we found out very early on is that buttons are kind of boring. So how do you make therapy, again, fun? How do you make it engaging? How do you make it so that it works for this system? And so one of the ways we do that is we designed a plush animal that allowed a child to interact with these games, just like with a button, just like with a switch, but it was in a playful format. And so now therapy is not about just hitting a button or hitting a tablet or moving your arms. Playing becomes part of what you do. Playing becomes this aspect. And so what we've done is we've changed this whole aspect of you're doing therapy, you're going to the clinic, into you are playing and you are engaging and you are having fun. And that is what we do with the robotic systems and the games. So I'm going to talk about the therapy code. So we've gamified therapy. We've talked about some of the assistive technologies that allow children with severe mobility impairments to interact with these games. And then we have a coach. And so as an engineer, I was like, I got the games, check. Assistive technologies, check. Let's bring in the robots. Like, what could possibly go wrong? Wait. How do you know that it works? And so this is my clinician asked. I was like, wait, the robot's ready. Robot, let's go, kids. No. We need to make sure that the robot works. We need to make sure that it's not just about play and fun, which, it is, but we need to make sure that whatever the robot is doing, how the robot is interacting with the child, the types of games, that at the end of the day, the focus is on improvement. So we need to be able to measure that. So as an engineer, I was like, oh, wait, what happened to the gadgets? I built the gadgets. I have the games. I have these technologies. I have the robot. It's ready. So how do you then think about measuring outcomes? So went to the drawing board, went to the clinician, started reading the literature, going to conferences, APTA and PT conferences, trying to figure out what this is. And so realized that there was this whole suite of physical therapy metrics that are used to measure outcomes. Everything from range of motion to path length to even jerkiness and movement smoothness. And so I looked and I thought, okay, so how would we extract this information while the child is interacting with these games? How do we do this in a way that makes sense, that doesn't interfere necessarily, that still provides some guidance, but doesn't change it into like a lab environment where maybe we have to put on sensors and that becomes more invasive and no longer fun, no longer as engaging. And so what we did is we designed camera systems. We use the Kinect. We also have standard cameras where you're interacting with this game. Tablets have cameras. Phones have cameras. For if you're working in the virtual reality, you don't necessarily have a camera, but we can put a Kinect on top of the monitor, on top of the screen. So now we have a camera, which means that it no longer becomes invasive for the child if we can use these camera data to collect the images and compute these kinematic metrics. And so that's what we did. It was how do you then design using a low cost camera that's either on a tablet or on a phone or from the Kinect? How do you use it and how do you design the algorithms so that you get the data that you need at the resolution that the clinician desires in order to monitor and ensure that the robot is doing its job, which is improving these outcomes, these motor outcomes. And so we designed it, we developed it, and then we deployed it. And now comes the lesson. So whenever we're deploying a technology, we bring in kids at the very beginning, very early on, just to kind of test it out. But when we're evaluating the outcomes, we first start with adults. And so just like with anything, we started with adults. We designed a model that represented the adults, the characteristics, so that we can do a comparison about real data versus what we call simulated kinematic model data, and do a comparison about if the human does something and we have a model that does an estimation about their learning outcomes and figure out the kinematics of their movement, does it match in the real world? And so for that, we would bring in adults into the lab. We would retrofit them with markers. So we would use the standard like an OptiTrack system. And then we would compare it with our low cost sensor to see if we got the correct data. And then we would bring them in to see, was there an improvement over the length of how long they played the game and things like that. So we were very excited. We brought in for one of our early studies, we brought in these adults. We had them move around, both right hand, left hand, and we computed their kinematics based on truth data, so markers, and then based on our low cost sensor grungy algorithm data. And basically, in terms of accuracy, it was within, effect size were close to zero. Our confidence intervals were in this nice sweet spot for pretty much every parameter except for path length. And so as an engineer, one of the things that we strive to do is always improve our accuracy. And so I remember the first time we ran this, and I was like, well, there's path length, I have some ideas about of how to fix it. I've looked at the model, we need to do some type of gravity compensation, but then we also have to incorporate. And she was like, no, wait. I was like, well, but we could do it. I just need, maybe 3 months. She was like, no. And I asked her why. And she said, this is actually good enough because it doesn't have to be perfect over all measurements. It just has to be good enough so that we can validate and quantify the improvements and that we feel like we can trust those values. And the values that you have that are highly accurate and correlated with the truth data, they're good. And yes, the one you have isn't so good, but if I take the entire package, that is good enough for us to determine if this technology works in the field. Now, this is counter to typically how an engineer thinks. It's like, wait, hold it. There was one parameter off. We need to make sure that we get it done and it's perfect. And I learned that that's not always the case when you're working with people in the field in this healthcare domain. You have to get an improvement. You have to get better. And once you get better, then you can move on. But if you always try to make it perfect from the very beginning, you may never even get to better because you're always working off the bugs. So I accepted that. I was like, okay, what's next? And she smiled. This is the clinician I work with. And she says, now it's time for kids. Now, one of the things about adults is that adults actually follow the rules, right? Like when you have them come in a study and you put on markers and you say, play this game, use your left hand, use your right hand 10 times, 10 times, come back in a week, we want to do a repeatability study. They kind of follow directions, they follow attention, and they're pretty good. Kids, on the other hand, aren't really as good. Like they don't follow directions. I have a rule, I have a set. They do whatever it requires for them to enhance their own enjoyment. And I saw this in the field. So we brought our system out and we didn't bring them into the lab because we wanted to see what kids did and how they interacted with the games in their environment, in the real world. And so we would go over to houses, we would set up the system, and we would collect this data. And kids were doing, you're supposed to, I need you to hit the ball 10 times with right hand. And there was a bubble that was like in the middle, and whoop, there goes the left. Well, the right hand was still up. And we're like, well, at least the system didn't crash, right? And so there was all these nuances where kids were just being kids and they were playing. And I went back and we looked at the algorithm and it was all over the place. But the fact is that the algorithm actually worked. And I will tell you, it was amazing because of all the deviations and all the variations. And there was no nice mean with a nice Gaussian distribution. It was all over the place in terms of movement, but it worked. And so we were ready. So we had validated that we can track measurements in the field in real time with kids that were just being kids. And the system can monitor the kinematics and can monitor the improvements. So I talked about the system. What about the robot? Can I now bring in the robot, please? I really want to just bring in the robot because, I'm a roboticist. So now comes the robot. So one of the things about robotics is that kids are fascinated by robots. I mean, and this was all, and in fact, I will say adults are too, but children are fascinated by robots. And one of the nice things then about robotics is that because of this natural affinity, we bring in a robot to the system, and it's not even a question of, what am I supposed to do with that robot? It's can I keep the robot? How long can I keep it for? Please don't take it, right? And it changes then, again, this interaction, which is what we were trying to do, is it's not therapy, it's about play, it's about exercise, it's about having a robot playmate. And one of the things about bringing these robots designed the way they were in this playful manner is that they were already, just by their presence alone, it changed the conversation about what this was about, which was a great thing. And so some of the things that we did in terms of interactions focused on, one is how do you design the robot movement so that it can evoke the correct response from the child? Robots don't have the same kind of structure as kids or as adults, in fact, but they do have, the structure of, having two arms, having sort of hands of some sort. And so how do we map their movements such that the kid understands and you can have this interactive play? And so the way that we designed it is with the games, child would play with the game, robot would play with the game, just like you would do with brother or sister or friend, and they would basically play off of each other in this aspect, which also meant that the robots had to have some emotional intelligence, or at least they had to appear to have some emotional intelligence. And so what does this mean? This means that our robots not only had to understand people's and kids' emotions, but they also had to emote in an equivalent manner. And so what does this mean? This means that if a child was playing a game and say they were struggling, there's a bubble and they missed it. A good friend would, man, that was rough. I would have missed it too. what happens when you succeed and the bubble comes and then you get it? Your robot friend should be like, that is awesome. We are awesome. That is cool. It should be exciting. And so the robot has to have quote unquote emotional intelligence. And when I say that, it basically means that the robot has to have an equivalent aspect of emoting based on what's going on with the child in the game. And so we developed a whole system where not only could we recognize the emotions of kids, at least the depicted emotions of kids, but the robot had the intelligence to then have a correlated emotion that matched whatever the emotion of the child was. And that was fascinating, amazing, because it required me as at that time, engineer, again, computer scientist, but to go down the path of understanding this whole field of emotions and what it's used and how to recognize it in this visual space. And so with that, we then also looked at how you design robots. Not only these humanoid robots, but could we also design robots for younger kids? And so recent research, and I'm just gonna really kind of throw this in because I'm excited about it, is designing robots using the mobile structure to also engage infants in exercise. And again, going through the journey of now not only do we have a human that doesn't follow directions and doesn't pay attention, i.e. children, now we have one that doesn't even understand what rules are and can't emote in the same equivalent manner and tell you anything, right? And so again, exploring what does that mean when you're a human and all those assumptions you had already made because you're working with kids now break because you're working with another type of population, still human, but in this infant space. And so I can tell you whole stories about how do you design robotics around infants that aren't able to communicate, not even able to tell you if they like it or not. And so we have this. And so if I look at all this together with the infants and interacting with the kids, here's an example of a video, one of our humanoids interacting with a child. And you see, I don't even have to have the sound, but you can see how the robot, basically was like, hey, looking at the child. When the child is interacting, there was conversation going on. And all of this basically positions the robot as the playmate. And look, the robot is sad. And we all know then what that means. And the child knows what that means. And so it's a great experience. And I love this. I enjoy this. And then it's okay, it's great. Show me what it can actually do. Where is the outcome? So you have these cute robots, they're engaging, they're fascinating, they're amazing. You're collecting this data, but do they actually work? And so we've done a number of studies in this space where we have the robot working with the child as this playmate, as this interactive partner, working and interacting with the games. And in an example in the video that I'm showing here, we're looking at upper body movements. And so the child is required to play a game, interact with the game, pop the bubbles, and the robot is interacting with the child in this matter. And we've done these, our longest session has been 8 weeks. Our shortest has been basically a day. And we've done things like repeatability to make sure that, if it's a Monday and we come back the Monday after, we're getting the same outcomes. It wasn't just either a bad Monday or a good Monday in all these aspects. And so I want to show you and kind of delve into what we've learned in this space. And so this is an example of some of our outcomes. And I just want to bring attention to a couple of things that informs not only the opinions of how we do these tests even now, but also another lesson. And so this is an example of a study where we brought in children with CP. And when I say brought in, we recruited, we would, again, go to their homes. We don't bring kids into the lab. So we go to their homes, we deploy because we want it to be playful in their home environment. And we did the same thing with typical kids. So we brought in the robots, and what we wanted to see was, what are the learning outcomes? So if you're doing this for, a number 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week, over a couple of weeks, what is the learning outcome? And so on the top graph, which you can see, so round one was what we call there's no robot, you're just playing the game, we're just extracting your baseline movement factor. The middle round two is where the robot is there interacting and playing with you for a good amount of time. And then round three is we take away the robot. And what we want to make sure is that because we are designing these robots as playmates and as interactive partners, the one thing though we do not want to do is create a technology that the child has to rely on in order to increase function, right? And so the worst thing is we do not want to create a dependency of child with respect to robot. And so part of the test of taking away the robot is to see, when you remove the robot from the equation, do you still retain those learning outcomes? So a couple of, and I'm going to stay on the slide because it really summarizes all the different things that we've learned working in this space. So one is that when the robot is present, when you have, and this is round two, middle column, top graph is children with cerebral palsy, bottom graph is typical kids. When you are interacting with the robot, kids are changing. They're moving faster. They have straighter line motions. They are, in some cases now doing midline crossing. So they are improving, whether you are a child with a motor disability or not, when the robot is present. And if we tease this, it's because it's fun, it's engaging. The robot is there, it's playing. And the robot, of course, is this partner, and you want to beat the robot. So this is what happens. But then something interesting happens. When you remove the robot from the equation, there's a decrease. There's a decrease in the movement factor. And you think, but the game, remember, the game is adapting to your profile. The game is, if you're going faster, the game is adapting to become faster. If your range of motion is increasing, the game is adapting to also increase so that you are pushing yourself. And so when we move the robot, your movement changes. Now it's better than your baseline. So you are still moving faster, you still have better straight line motion, but it's not the same as when the robot is there. Which tells us, one, is that the robot is successful. It's a playmate, it's a great thing, it's awesome. And so we've done our job in terms of that. But it also causes, as a roboticist, a little bit of worry, because it also means that when we're bringing in these systems, we're also creating a little bit of dependency. And so a lot of the work that I also focus on now is thinking about this aspect of overtrust. And when I say overtrust, it's an overtrust and reliance on the technology. And how do we break that? So how do we ensure that we get all the positive outcomes of the robot coming in and having positive outcomes, but how do we do it such that we are careful not to have a dependency or reliance on this? And so we are working on this actively because we think that there's so many amazing positive benefits that we also want to enhance that, but we also want to mitigate any of the negatives. And so just kind of last thoughts. One is that robots and children, they can play together. We know this. I'm so happy. It took a while from the, getting the games ready, getting in the assistive technologies, doing the measurements before we could even get to the bring in the robots. And I am a roboticist, right? Like that's what I want to do. But going through that entire process, you learn so much about how do you put a system together. You learn so much about how do you work in the home environment with clinicians, with parents, and with kids, that I now know that if I had just brought in the robot at the beginning, it probably wouldn't have worked as well. And so last thing is that I mentioned this aspect of the reliance and the dependency. And one of the things I think about is, how far should we push it? There's just so much that can still be done in this space. There's so much in terms of enhancing not only upper body movement, but also lower body in terms of gait, and kicking. But there's also this aspect of, when should you bring in automation? When should you bring in this robotic technology versus the human in the loop? And so there's still a boundary condition. We have not yet reached that. I mean, that's a good thing, but there is a boundary condition. So one of the other things I think about is, in terms of robotics technologists and robotics technology itself, is how far should we push it? How far should we make this seamless and part of our everyday lives versus still allowing us as people a little bit of autonomy as we're thinking and getting through this. And so with that, all of this technology and devices, we pride ourselves on making most of it open source, so it's available and can be disseminated more widespread. So that's one of the values that I actually bring as a technologist. And this is not only through rehabilitation, but also in education with respect to children with special needs. I want to thank, of course, my robots. They work long and hard and a lot of hours. Sometimes they are slightly abused because they may fall, and sometimes the students drop them, but they still show up. They still work with the robots, and they don't complain at all, unless I program them to. And I also want to thank all of my students and collaborators and postdocs and research scientists and funding agencies, because without them, of course, it would be a one-person show, which basically means that it would be no show at all. And so with that, I am going to open it up for questions. I think we have a good 12 minutes left. And you can ask me anything, either about the pediatric robotics, about any of the questions I have in terms of pushing the boundaries, and anything in between. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hara. That was fascinating. There are quite a few questions. We'll try to get to a few of them. I'll read the first one out. First one's from Aisling Kelleher. She asks, how do you integrate qualitative observations with your quantitative measurements? And how might that form of integration impact your algorithmic approach?
Yeah, so the qualitative we do is mainly behavioral based. And that is, we typically have code, because remember, we collect videos of everything because we have these cameras. And so if there's something that we want to do, as an example, engagement, do we really quantify engagement correctly? We will use the qualitative metrics. And basically it's coders that are labeling. So it's basically a labeling function. And are they happy? Are they frustrated? Are they sad, as an example? So that is done. And it's used, honestly, it's used to not only validate our algorithms, but it's also data that's used to train them if we get anything wrong.
Great, thank you. Stephanie DeLuca asked, do you work to have robotics be a part of therapy or to replace some portions of in-person therapy, such as telerehab?
So the way that I think about is to augment therapy. If I ask, and I've done this many times, parents, how many days a week does your child do therapy? If the therapist is in the room, they will say 5 days a week. When the therapist is not in the room, they like, yeah, sometimes, right? And so the fact is that compliance in the home is pretty bad. And so what we want to do is bring it into the home environment to basically augment what children are supposed to do, which we know they are not doing. So it's not a replacing function at this point.
Gotcha, thank you. Marcus Speaker asks, if you're looking at ways to integrate this technology with health records, such that a healthcare provider could order and modify therapy programs remotely. In other words, if the child has met the goals and they move on to more advanced movements without needing to go back out to the home, especially for rural families, for example.
Yeah, so we have the ability to do that. And I will tell you, so we do have the ability to do that. And I will tell you why we do not. So very early on, we held a bunch of focus groups with both therapists and clinicians, medical doctors, and parents. And one of the things that they wanted was a little bit of control of that. And so even though we can do adaptation, because we've collected all this data, we can do adaptation of the system in terms of the protocol, because we have all this data we can compare. We don't. And it's because we want to make sure that there's still a human in control. And that is because that's the feedback we have. Now that might change, right? In a year, and 2 years, and 5 years, maybe even now, because of the inability necessarily to access. But it was driven by the experts of saying, no, we want to be able to have that control versus, the system deciding what protocol to do today.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Ashley, who wanted to know if the robots might be used for children with autism spectrum disorders, and if they were, she'd be interested to see the charted development for that as a mother of a child on the spectrum.
Yes, so we have done a few studies with children with autism, and it's been positive, but the types of studies we've done have been behavioral studies. So we were looking at, can we translate turn-taking behavior between child and human, child and robot, and then child and human. So can we, what we found was that when a child was working with robots, we can basically reinforce that taking turns was important with these games. And that translation actually then resulted in a translation to a human, and not only just a human, a stranger. And so that was interesting, and I can share some papers with that. But what's more important is there was a recent study that was done out of Yale, so Brian Scazzolati, who had done a long-term study with robots in the home with children with autism. And they have all the data, they have all the stats to show that it has positive outcomes in various types of therapy. And so I'm definitely willing to share, but that's the longest study, intensive study with data that's out there.
Great, thank you. I want to take a privilege asking my own question right now, if I could. I was very curious as I watched the movies. Have you done anything with eye tracking with the kids to see exactly what cues they're focusing on, using some sort of forced choice looking task or something, or just some way of tracking eyes?
Yes, so we have done a bunch of eye tracking, but not in the rehab space. We've done it in the education space. So we've designed a bunch of technologies with robot tutors and math, because we wanted to see where they focus so that we could determine attention, because basically what we want to look at is we use it as a cue for how difficult the child thinks it's going to be. It's amazing that you can figure out their confidence level based on looking at where they are focusing on when you have a math problem. And then the robot intercedes based on the eye gaze. And we had a little bit of work before my student left on using that to also work with early stage Alzheimer's as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Sarah Parker said she's curious about a couple things. So firstly, does this type of intervention go to other games? So in other words, could they play Angry Birds and get the same impact? And then she said, what are the usability considerations for this type of population? Do you consider the kids or also the parents?
So use of games, it does not work with commercial platforms as of yet. And it's because they're closed is the only reason. We have used and done some, I would say, some jimmy rigging with things like PlayStation and iToy, and then use the robot, but it's a delay because we have to basically parse the information, look at the game score, then feed it. And so it's not a direct linkage at all. And then do we keep in mind the parents? Yes. So one of the reasons of going into the home environment and the natural environment is to involve the parents, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that have to at least start the system up during our long trials. And so we do a full training with the parents, and we've done it before in terms of ease of use, usability. Does the system make sense? Does it impede any of your progress? Why would you not use it? So that we can design it so that they would use it and effectively during our trials to evaluate outcomes.
Okay. Emily Hutchison asked if you've looked at how performance increases or decreases when playing with a sibling in comparison to the drop-off noted when using the robot.
So we have, and one of the things that we notice is that there is much more of a frustration factor when playing with, at least with siblings that are either older or have a higher motor ability. And one of the reasons is because the robot is actually programmed to lose most of the time, right? And so what we found in a bunch of our engagement study is in order to empower, have self-efficacy in the child has to feel like they are succeeding, which in gaming world means that they are beating and winning. And so when we have the robot that wins sometimes, right? So it's not always losing, but, and we, just so you know, we have the data collected. Is actually a model of when it should lose and when it should win. But we find that the way that it's done is the child feels empowered and is like, I can do this. We can't control siblings. And so what we find is that the competition makes the actual child, they like it at the beginning. Engagement factor, like first game, is like really high, but it drops even worse because of the fact that they're usually not winning.
Right, thank you. Sharon Ramey said she was wondering if you think robots could be used to help train the therapists to be more aware and responsive, particularly in learning to engage children with different types of needs, physical, emotional, communicative needs, for example.
You know, I hadn't thought of that because we're always using the clinicians and therapists as our data source. Like that's the truth. That's the baseline that we're grabbing data for. I hadn't thought about the other way, honestly.
Okay, we can talk more about that. So just a couple minutes here. I think I'll turn to a couple of our graduate students who threw in questions and with a couple of those. One, Hassan Farah asked, do you still pull from your NASA experience when you're thinking of future developments in pediatric robotics? In what ways?
So I will tell you that my working with scientists at NASA is what I translated to this space. And so at NASA, the scientists were the experts. So you think of scientists and clinicians. Scientists, not engineers, they were the domain experts. They weren't the roboticists. How do I get what they're doing in their information and encode it so it can translate to the robot? So that practice is what I brought to the pediatric robotics space. And how do you get someone who's very, very, very knowledgeable to speak in the language of roboticists, which is a whole practice in itself. And so that was a direct translation.
Yeah, good, thank you. And maybe this will be the last one. It's really a comment from one of our students, Ibada Sabah, who says, if you ever find yourself wanting a fun side project, a robot that can write my dissertation would be great. So look, let me just take this opportunity to thank you again, Dr. Howard. That was a fantastic and stimulating presentation and lots of ideas for all of us to think about more, and thanks for all the good work you're doing. So everybody, please join me in thanking Dr. Howard for an outstanding presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for attending. There you go. The delayed applause.